In 1953, a drunk criminal named Carl Austin Hall came in here with his girlfriend and $600,000 in a footlocker. The place was known as Columbo's at the time, and after a few drinks, he went nearby and bought a car off a lot. Then he and his girlfriend and the money crashed in an apartment around the corner on Arsenal Street. And I ate lunch here every week. They were only in St. Louis for about 38 hours before it all fell apart. But that's where the story ends. Let's go back to the beginning. Kansas City. Bobby Greenlease was 6 years old. He was the son of Robert Cosgrove Greenlease and Virginia Greenlease. Robert Greenlease owned well-known Cadillac dealerships. He was one of the wealthiest men in Kansas City. Carl Austin Hall, our intrepid criminal, had actually grown up with money himself. He inherited it. He drank most of it and then gambled away the rest. He took to robbing cab drivers for a living. Caught a couple years in the pen for armed robbery where he dreamed up a plan. And his genius plan was to kidnap the Greenlease boy, collect a ransom, and disappear. Okay, so he had some fine-tuning to do on the collect the ransom part, and the disappear part needed some work. But he had a solid plan to kidnap the boy. His plan was to send his girlfriend, Bonnie Heady, to pose as the boy's aunt and pick the boy up from school under the pretense that his mother had become ill, which is exactly what she did. School let him go. Carl Austin Hall killed him the same day. Our criminal may have been a stupid, desperate drunk, but he was also a psychopath. Later that evening, Hall mailed the ransom note, $600,000, the largest kidnapping ransom demand in American history at that point. $10 and $20 bills in a duffel bag. After he dropped the letter in the mailbox, he realized he may have written the wrong address on the envelope, so he mailed another one. Over the next week, he made 15 phone calls to the Greenlease home. He disguised his voice by talking through a handkerchief. He sent the family on 2 dummy runs, notes hidden under rocks, marked with red chalk, just to make sure the FBI wasn't setting a trap. Genius. By the time he worked up enough courage to attempt an actual pickup of the loot, he drove past the drop site and couldn't find the bag in the dark. So he called back to reschedule. The man demanding the largest ransom in American history had to call the victim's family and reschedule because he couldn't find the bag. Did I mention he was a dipshit? No? Oh, he was a dipshit. Meanwhile, the FBI had hundreds of agents on the case. Hoover himself was monitoring it. Personally. All this erratic behavior made them sure they were dealing with a highly sophisticated criminal operation. But they were dealing with Carl Austin Hall, a drunk who mailed the ransom note to the wrong address and couldn't find an 85-pound duffel bag in the dark. Somehow, Hall outsmarted his own stupidity long enough to get the money. $600,000 in cash in a duffel bag on the side of the highway outside of Kansas City. He pulled over, popped the trunk, checked it with a flashlight, made one final phone call to the Greenlease home, and told them Bobby was fine, and they'd hear from him soon. Bobby had been dead for a week. Then he and Heady checked out of their motel at 2 a.m. and drove 380 miles east of St. Louis, where they blew a small chunk of cash at around 60 locations. Bars, department stores, dress shops, luggage stores, car rentals, bus terminals. Hall was drunk most of the time, and Heady was drunk for all of it. Hall was also on Benzedrine. This wasn't the execution of a well-orchestrated getaway plan. It was more of a demented bar crawl. They arrived in St. Louis on October 5th, 1953. This was their first stop, Sportsman's Tap. 6 a.m. Time for a drink. Once they got inside, Hall did something that tells you everything you need to know about how this week was gonna go. He walked over to the payphone and called his lawyer back in St. Joseph, Missouri. A guy named Barney Patton.
Yeah,
asked them to go to the rental car agency and destroy all the paperwork for the car they were renting. Patton told him no, and pointed out that destroying company records that could be used for evidence was illegal. Hall hung up and went back to his drink. J. Edgar Hoover, head of the FBI, had hundreds of agents looking for these two. Hall's only plan was to take a road trip to St. Louis and go drinking and figure it out from there. They drank for a while. Then they realized the giant 85-pound green army duffel bag they were dragging around with them might get recognized. They thought that maybe they needed to put the money in something less conspicuous. How about a giant metal footlocker? That works. They flagged down a cab and took it downtown. Bonnie needed another drink, so she settled into a booth at Slay's Bar on North Broadway and started working out a bottle of Walker's Deluxe. Hall walked down the street to the Broadway Army store to buy a footlocker. Not a garment bag or a suitcase, something that would be easy to carry around. Nope, Hall chose a metal footlocker, the kind you'd store in a garage. Practical. They took the cab back to the car, drove to an alley on Wyoming Street, and transferred the money in broad daylight. Mid-morning, Monday. People were going about their day. The footlocker was so full that they couldn't get the lid closed. Hall ripped out the internal tray and threw it in the alley. Then he sat on the lid until the latches caught. Then he threw the original ransom duffel bag in an ash pit in the alley. The bag the Greenlease family had packed the money into, the primary piece of federal evidence connecting him to the crime, was in an ash pit in an alley. Then he stopped back in here for a drink. Still thirsty, I guess. 4504 Arsenal. They rented a room here by the week, and they signed a lease, says Mr. and Mrs. Grant. The landlady watched Carl Austin Hall drag the footlocker up the front steps while Bonnie held on to the railing. They said she was sick, but the reality was she probably just had too much to drink. He got her inside, and she passed out on the bed. Then Hall left $2,000 in the dresser, grabbed the footlocker, and walked out. He just left. She woke up around noon the next day, alone, and went to a liquor store. Bought whiskey and groceries, but mostly whiskey, and came back here to drink. She was arrested at midnight. When they busted her, she was complaining about the terrible parking situation on Arsenal. We feel you, Bonnie. Some things never change. Hall, meanwhile, was operating solo, which did not improve his decision-making one bit. Then Hall flagged down another cab. He got the same driver he used that morning, John Hager. In a city full of cabs, he got the exact same guy. Hall tipped him $100. In 1953, that was about a week's wages for a cab driver. And Hager noticed. This dumb drunk seemed to have a lot of cash on him for some reason. Hall checked into the Coral Court Motel, cabin 49A, with a woman he met that same day, Sandra O'Day. Coral Court was famous in St. Louis. Every cabin had an attached garage with a door that closed behind you. You could hang out there for weeks and nobody would know you were there. Hall brought the footlocker inside. Time for a drink. At some point, Hall let his ignorance outsmart him again and came up with a brilliant idea. He wrote a letter to Barney Patton, the same lawyer who'd already refused to help him once, saying he was headed to Los Angeles. His plan was to get Sandy to fly out there and mail it so the FBI would think he would left St. Louis. And because Carl Austin Hall was a certified genius, he handed her the letter and $1,000 in cash. Sandy thanked him for the cash, got in Hager's cab, read the letter out loud to Hager, kept the money and left. Hager drove straight to the owner of the cab company, Joe Costello, local mob boss. His cab driver had found a mark. Costello called his guy in the St. Louis Police Department, Lieutenant Louis Shoulders. Hall had overtipped the stranger, kept using him as a driver, and trusted him with information about the money. Hager did what anyone in his position would do. He told his boss. Court Hotel stood here till 1993. Now it's this, just a typical suburban subdivision. When they tore it down, people actually showed up to watch. The rumor was that the missing ransom money was hidden inside the walls of cabin 49A. Hall left here on Tuesday afternoon, paranoid and alone. He drove to a hardware store, bought 2 metal garbage cans and a shovel, and headed out towards the Merrimack River to bury the money. Out here, somewhere. He drove out to this riverbank wearing a suit, carrying a shovel and 2 metal garbage cans, then tried to dig a hole deep enough to bury $600,000. The ground was hard, there were fishermen nearby. He wandered around for hours, exhausted, sweating through his suit, and he couldn't find a spot. He gave up, left the garbage cans in an abandoned clubhouse near the river, and drove back to the city with the money still in the trunk. He landed back here. This used to be the Townhouse Hotel. He got room 324. Tuesday evening, October 6th, a crooked St. Louis detective, Lieutenant Louis Shoulders, and his rookie partner, Elmer Dolan, knocked on the door. Shoulders had gotten a tip from Costello that the drunk fool was crashing here. Hall answered the door. When Shoulders found the money, Hall looked at him and said, "The jig's up." He offered zero resistance. He was sick, he was shaking, he was practically falling out of his chair during questioning. He gave a full confession. He also gave up Bonnie's location immediately. Hall and Heady were caught and executed 81 days after the kidnapping. December 18th, 1953. That's the surface of it anyway. Here's the official version. Bad people did a bad thing, and justice was swift. Carl Austin Hall and Bonnie Heady were executed side by side in the Missouri gas chamber 81 days after the kidnapping. As they were being strapped into the chair, Heady was chatting away cheerfully. Hall told her to shut up. Even at the very end, he was the worst person in the room. That's the official version anyway, but before I tell you what really happened to the money, I wanted to let you know that this film took a long time to put together. If you want to see more of this kind of work, there's a Patreon. You'll get early access, extended cuts, the occasional updates on what's coming next. Links in the description. But here's what else happened. When Shoulders and Dolan brought Hall in, the other cops counted the money back at the station. $288,000. Hall had told the FBI he'd spent maybe $40,000 during his week in St. Louis. Cars, bribes, whiskey, tips to cab drivers. So the math should have come out around $560,000, but it came out to $288,000. More than half the ransom was missing. At the moment of arrest, while in direct physical custody of 2 St. Louis police officers. Here's what Dolan eventually told the FBI. After Shoulders arrested Hall, still not knowing that he was the Greenlease kidnapper because Hall had given a fake name, Shoulders, Dolan, and Costello drove to Costello's house. In the basement, the cash was stacked into 2 suitcases. Shoulders offered Dolan $50,000 to keep quiet. Dolan said he turned it down. Told them both not to do it. Then he got back in the car. Shoulders and Dolan were both indicted, convicted of perjury. Not theft, perjury. The government couldn't even prove they took it. They sentenced them to 3 and 2 years respectively. Both resigned from the force. Both came back and lived out their days quietly in the St. Louis area. The FBI spent years trying to get Dolan to talk. They dangled a presidential pardon. He kept saying no. Too scared of Shoulders and Costello to open his mouth. Then in May of 1962, Shoulders died of a heart attack. 6 weeks later, Costello also died of a heart attack. Then Dolan called the FBI. He was flown to Washington and gave a 6-page statement to an agent named Philip King. He confirmed that Costello was the unidentified man that Hall had seen standing in the hallway the night of his arrest. He confirmed that they went to Costello's basement. He confirmed that they split the cash. He said he turned down the $50,000. President Johnson pardoned him in 1965, and Dolan died in 1973. So where did the money go after the basement? The FBI had a few theories. One involved a St. Louis brothel owner named Mary Traynor, Costello's aunt by marriage. He owed her money. He had borrowed from her to bankroll the cab company. The theory was that he paid her back with the ransom money. In 1961, a year before Costello died, 2 men broke into Trainor's home and beat and shot her. Before she died, she told police Joe Costello sent them. Nobody was ever charged. Another thread led to the Teamsters. A union official named Gus Zappas was arrested in Chicago 19 days after Hall and Heady, allegedly meeting to discuss the laundering of a large sum of money. Robert F. Kennedy questioned him personally before the Senate committee. Jimmy Hoffa sat in the gallery and watched. Zappas denied everything. Hoffa didn't say a word. The FBI's best working theory that the money moved through the Chicago mob, possibly through carnivals and circuses, introducing bills back into circulation in small Midwestern towns where nobody was checking serial numbers. Some of the recovered bills turned up in towns where carnivals had recently passed through. The FBI assigned one agent, a man named Howard Kennedy, to track the missing bills full-time. He spent 15 years on the assignment. Out of 30,000 bills, he recovered 115 of them, $1,690. 15 years, $1,690. The case was officially closed on March 25th, 1970. The money's still out there, technically. So Hall and Heady were executed. The mob boss died, the dirty cop died, the money disappeared. Hey Steve, have you heard this story before?
I think I read about that in the book.
There are 2 books that are worth your time. James Deacon's A Grave for Bobby. Deacon covered the case for the Post-Dispatch when it happened. Spent the rest of his career as a Washington correspondent and then came back to write the definitive account. Good book. John Hendry's Zero at the Bone covers the same ground from a different angle. Also good. I'll put links to these books in the description. The city's forgotten all about this story. The Townhouse Hotel became an apartment building, and they built a subdivision where the Coral Court Motel was. And then they left that building on Jefferson just to fall apart on its own. But this place is still here, and I eat lunch here every week. I sit in the same spot. Seems fine.